As Premier Ford prepares to trigger an early election to deal with Donald Trump, the U.S. president continues his fixation on Canada. Here he is speaking earlier today while visiting North Carolina.
I would love to see Canada be the 51st state. The Canadian citizens, if that happened, would get a very big tax cut, tremendous tax cut, because they're very highly taxed. And you wouldn't have to worry about military. You wouldn't have to worry about many of the things. You'd have better health coverage. You'd have much better health coverage. So I think the people of Canada would like it.
Okay, so for more on all this, let's bring in the CBC's Alexander Panetta. He joins us from Washington. And Alex, just before we speak to you, I just want to let our viewers know that we are hearing from the defense minister here in Canada, just, because Donald Trump is talking about the military and he's been talking about these 5% targets now for NATO. Well, we heard the defense minister saying hitting the 2% NATO target, because it's a moving target, spending target in 2 years amid pressure from Trump is absolutely achievable. So that's kind of moving up the plans as everyone tries to kind of pivot to this new Donald Trump administration. Now, Alex, when it comes to Trump, and he seems fixated on this idea of tariffs, and you've written about this, and he's talked about territorial expansion. I mean, we haven't heard a U.S. president in decades and decades and decades talk this way. Tell us more about that.
The last significant American politician to actually talk in even a semi-joking way about annexing Canada was the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Champ Clark, in 1911. And that was part of a free trade debate with Canada, saying we get free trade with Canada, eventually the American flag, the stars and stripes, will fly all the way up to the North Pole. And there was some debate about whether he did that to sabotage free trade with Canada. 120 years later, almost, we've got Donald Trump talking about it. And so at first I thought it was probably just a joke, right? This sort of idea came out of his meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau at Mar-a-Lago. And it was interesting and notable that was the U.S. leak to Fox News coming out of the meeting, right? So we Canadians were hearing, meeting went well, they talked about these issues, it's potentially resolvable, the border's not going to be a problem, we can work together. And Fox News' first report was he trolled Trudeau by talking about Canadian statehood. So I thought at first, okay, it's just a joke. Then he kept making the joke, and I thought, maybe he, just doesn't like Prime Minister Trudeau, and he's making life a little difficult for him. But he's continued and is so persistent about it that you're starting to wonder whether something more serious is afoot. Now, I'll just give you 2 data points here. One, today, he was not asked about Canada. All right, that clip you played was an exchange in North Carolina. He was touring a disaster site from the hurricane last fall. And a reporter asked him about the UK, trade between the United States and the United Kingdom. And he spontaneously brought up Canada right away. And he launched into it. And he put some elbow grease into the argument that Canada would be better off as a state. And he said, I would like to see Canada be a state. So this is not what he was saying a few months ago. And it's not a joke necessarily, right? The second data point is he had a phone call with the Prime Minister of Denmark. Financial Times reported, based on 5 sources, that the Danes were rattled by this phone call because he was, it apparently went terribly, and he was dead serious about making Greenland part of the United States as well. So you look at this and say, now I just figured it was trolling a few weeks ago. Now I'm not quite as sure.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. And I guess the differentiation has been, so far, he has talked about maybe a military intervention for Greenland. He has not talked about that for Canada. He has used economic coercion, language like that, when it comes to Canada. I think we're going to play a clip just to listen to a little bit more about what the U.S. president had to say today.
Yeah. With Canada, we lose $200 billion a year with Canada. That's because we allow them to make cars. We allow them to take lumber. We don't need their cars. We don't need their lumber. We don't need their food products because we make the same products right on the other side of the border. It's sort of crazy. So we've just allowed that, bad management has allowed it over the last 4 years in particular to become very imbalanced.
And so, Alex, that $200 billion figure, sometimes it's $250 billion. It's not correct. The trade deficit with Canada is much less than that. If you take oil out, they have a surplus. We can say all these things over and over again. But my question to you is, I'm wondering, because we've been having a debate in the newsroom about this. Some are saying, look, this whole talk of Canada becoming a 51st state, it's part of the art of the deal. It's a negotiation tactic. And then there are others that are saying, wait a second, this does sound like he's trying to build, whether it's Monroe Doctrine, he has expansionist ideas in his mind that he actually really does want Canada to become the 51st state, and he's going to work hard to try and achieve that.
Look, this is a debate I've been having in my own mind over the last couple of months myself. I mean, I just would have assumed up until very recently that it was either a joke or him, again, torturing a prime minister of Canada who's, politically vulnerable on his way out the door and with whom he's butted heads in the past. And then for the reasons you cited and the ones I mentioned, maybe he might be going a step further than this and exerting economic coercion and doing, frankly, what he says he's doing. He says, I want to pressure them economically until they become a state. And I would say Canada would probably be a heck of a lot less vulnerable to this kind of pressure if it had not tethered itself so closely to the United States economically. And this forever has seemed like a no-brainer. You're next to the world's largest market. It makes Canadian policymakers, the people who build our infrastructure, our businesses, it's kind of hard to overlook the humongous market you have next door. But, maybe if a U.S. politician were to say to a Canadian prime minister, we don't like our trade deficit with you, it would be nice if a Canadian prime minister had the cards to play to be able to say, you know what, you don't want a trade deficit with us anymore? No problem. We'll resolve that problem for you. We'll send our oil and our natural gas to Asia and Europe. We'll send our critical minerals to Germany so they can use them to build electric vehicles in Europe, and your trade deficit is solved, right? But we can't do that because we don't have the infrastructure.
And just a final point on this, Alex, because I know there was lots of talk about this being Donald Trump's personal animus towards Justin Trudeau, but I also remember him being asked, I believe it was about 2 weeks ago in another news conference, where a reporter said, Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, says it's not going to happen, that Canada is going to become a 51st state. And Donald Trump's response was, I don't care what he says. So I don't know whether it matters who's Prime Minister of Canada. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, here's the only bit maybe of good news I'll be able to offer you today. And that's we'll probably have a better sense in about 6 months. All right? Okay. Whether he's joking or not. So all this conversation we're having is kind of hypothetical and based on some unknowns. We may have a chance to test it against some real world factoids, including whether this trade irritant gets resolved or these irritants get resolved. And there are several, by the way. It's not just going to be the trade deficit or the border. There's going to be an election in Canada. Whether the current Liberal Party gets reelected or not, you'll have a stronger government with a stronger mandate in a few months. We'll get to test whether Donald Trump was joking or not, and we'll probably have some clarity by June.
And we'll all be having lots of conversations in our head about this. These are interesting times. Alex, always good to see you. Thank you very much. The CBC's Alexander Panetta in Washington.